his recent media frenzy,
Yeah.
saying that there's nothing to see here.
And look, my take on Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick. I mean, number one, he never wanted the job. He was ordered to take the job.
It's true.
And in the interviews that he's done since retiring from federal service, he's stated that publicly, that he was essentially told that you're going to have to take this. You're going to have to stand up this new organization. You have to do it. And in every interview that I've never met Dr. Kirkpatrick. I've only seen him in interviews and heard him on podcasts. But at face value, he's never come across as being all that enthused about his position as the then director, now former director of the All Domain Resolution Office, ARO. He comes across as he never wanted the job. It's a waste of time. He's just doing it as his last deliverable for the Department of Defense before he retires. And now he's off working at Oak Ridge, which has its own links to ufology with the likes of Battelle and so on. So I think there is certainly a degree of a controlled narrative and a strategic narrative being played here, because number one, when you had this media event where ARO was talking about the report that was held by current acting director of ARO, Timothy Phillips, there was only select members of select media outlets that were invited. News Nation was left off the list. Stephen Greenstreet wasn't invited. You had other networks that were not told about it at all, and
Yeah,
it only
they
found out about it because that information links. So they're inviting friendly media to a media event so that they can control the narrative and keep that strategic narrative in place.
Yeah, and I don't even know if I'd call Greenstreet on our side on the UFO community. So
well, look, irrespective of what you think of Stephen Greenstreet and his reporting, I mean, the fact that there was a strategic decision made by ARO and the Pentagon to be very selective and not invite select media outlets. I mean, that does not bode well for their commitment to maximum transparency, which Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick stated in his op-ed in Scientific American, that ARO is committed to maximum transparency. Well, that's complete bullshit. If you just look at the select media that was invited and select media that was excluded from that media event, it doesn't bode well. The optics of that don't sit well for transparency.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So let's jump into some territory, that you're probably, like I said, this is going to be something that you probably told or talked about many times. But you said in the intro, you gave me a little blurb, and you've been fascinated with this since childhood, but you started really, delving into it in recent years. What sparked that initial childhood interest in the topic? Was it some sort of sighting? If it wasn't, what was it? And then can you tell us a little bit about what brought you to the chair talking to me today?
So first and foremost, I've never had my own sighting. It's still very much on my bucket list. I like to say I would love to have a sighting before I shuffle off this mortal coil. But when I was around about in the mid 80s, I was about 6 or 7 years of age. I grew up in Sydney, Australia, and my father took me to a photo exhibition that was being held in Australia's tallest skyscraper. It was called Centrepoint Tower. It's kind of like the Seattle's Needle. Kind of looks the same sort of shape. Anyway, there was this photo exhibition being run in Sydney, and it was this is in the mid 80s, and it was a UFO exhibition, and they had a lot of these black and white photos blown up on canvases, kind of displayed around the exhibition. And I remember, I can still see it distinctly to this day. One of the photos was the famous black and white photo of the McMinnville sighting. And I just remember staring at this photo for what probably felt like a good 10-15 minutes, just trying to put myself in the shoes of that farmer or rancher and what they would have been feeling and experiencing when they captured what is that we now see on film on in that photo from the 1950s. And so that kind of sparked my fascination as a young child. And then obviously growing up as a teenager in the 90s, every Wednesday night at 9 p.m., I'd be watching the X-Files without fail, and then you do a big debrief with your schoolmates the next day at school. So that was another, the pop culture component in the 90s. And then kind of my interest ebbed and flowed over the years. But like so many other people, it really wasn't until the New York Times articles came out in December of 2017 that really piqued my interest again, sparked my interest. And then obviously throughout COVID, so many of us had so much more time at home. And where I live now in Melbourne, Australia, we endured one of the longest lockdowns on the planet. We were locked in our homes more than any other city around the planet. So I really, during that time, just became, there was obviously a lot more activity happening when COVID started. You had the likes of Lou Elizondo, starting to be a lot more public and do a lot more engagements on podcasts and so on. So I just really became a sponge on the topic and tried to learn as much as I could from as many as I could throughout that time. And I was watching shows like UCR, the Unidentified Celebrity Review, in its day, and there was a 3-day activism event that I credit to Lou Jimenez for really getting me off my ass and becoming a participant in this space, because it was the Big Phone Home 2 that really got me interested about, so many folks like me that are interested in the topic and take it seriously. So many of those folks that are in the US are now being motivated and encouraged through this 3-day activism event, the Big Phone Home 2, to engage their elected representatives on the topic and demand that they start taking it seriously and ask some serious questions. And I made me think, well, what is Australia doing about UAPs? And so then I applied that same sort of methodology and started engaging my elected representatives in Australia and the legacy media as well. So and exercising my right to information through using the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, and obviously developing a friendship with John Greenwald Jr. and learning a lot from just the information that he's put out there over time and in his work and documenting that in his live streams and so on. And it's through all of those efforts of my own that I have developed these, a network of really trusted colleagues and advisors that I've relied on for information, and I've shared information with them. The likes of Australian veteran researchers Keith Basterfield, who's done a ton of work in this space. Bill Chalker is another one. Obviously, everyone knows Ross Coulthard. And there, James Rigney, who had a hand in, getting the Wilson Davis docs out to the world. So I've been very fortunate that I've been able to learn from the likes of these folks and stand on the shoulders of those giants to try and find answers to questions that I've got on the topic, which is, well, what is Australia doing about UAPs? Why isn't it doing anything? And what will it take to move the needle on Australia's engagement on the topic?
Absolutely. I could, but that was perfectly put. Perfectly put.
Again, a long-winded answer, but we got there at the end.
So, with what we said earlier, you using, looking up to people like John Greenwald, who does also a good friend, has been on the show, and I really respect what he does, because he doesn't play what I like about John is he doesn't play the sides, right? Straightforward, what can we prove kind of guy.
Yeah.
And I really respect that kind of research. So can you share with us some of the most compelling research of the Australian UFO cases that you've encountered in your processes?
So well, most of my FOIA efforts in Australia have been pertaining not so much to cases, historical cases, but more the Australian government and the Australian Department of Defence's engagement, or rather lack thereof, on the topic. So, for a little bit of a history lesson for your audience, on the 27th of October of 2021, a couple of months after the ODNI released its preliminary assessment on UAP, there was an Australian senator, Green senator, Senator Peter Whish-Wilson, who in Australian Parliament, in a Senate estimates hearing, which is kind of like a budget oversight hearing, he then took all of his allotted time, which was just shy of 10 minutes, because he's a participating member on the Senate Estimates Committee for Defense, Foreign Affairs and Trade. He's not a full-time member, but he's a participating member. He used all of his time to press the then Chief of Air Force, Air Marshal Mel Hupfield, on Australia's involvement in the UAP topic. Is it taking UAP seriously, like our US and Five Eyes ally was, in following the release of ODNI's preliminary assessment on UAP? And it turned out from the Chief of Air Force, Air Marshal Mel Hupfield's responses, that no, Australia has no reporting or recording protocols in place. The Air Marshal, quote, didn't believe everything he read in the papers, so he thought the three videos, Go Fast, Gimbal, and FLIR 1 Tic Tac, were interesting but not compelling to him. So he kind of just poo-pooed the whole UAP issue altogether. But he was caught completely off guard with that line of questioning at that Senate estimates. So then fast forward to November of the following year, 2022, and obviously there'd been more activity and movement on the UAP topic in the United States since 2021. And so Senator Whish-Wilson took it upon himself to again ask in the Senate estimates the then new Chief of Air Force, Air Marshal Robert Chipman, about, well, with everything that is happening in the United States, has Australia had any engagement with the US Department of Defense on UAP? And has the Chief of Air Force, Air Marshal Robert Chipman, had any briefings from the United States on UAP? And the response basically was, no, same, move along, folks, nothing to see here. The Royal Australian Air Force is not taking it seriously. UAP is an issue for the US, and I'm completely paraphrasing, but that was the kind of line of the talking points, the strategic narrative that was being put out there by the Australian Department of Defense. Now, so I had then started utilizing in 2020, early 2022, I believe it was, the Freedom of Information Act, to try and better understand what discussions and conversations were happening within the Australian Department of Defense on UAP following that initial hearing in October of 2021. And I was able to secure for release the most significant document from the Australian Department of Defense on the topic of UAP UFOs since a Chief of Air Staff brief in the mid-90s on the topic. And essentially this document was a Chief of Air Force brief on UAP, and it basically stated that Australia has no interest in collaborating with any of its allies on the topic. We're not taking UAP seriously, even though the United States deems it a national security and safety of flight risk. And we, the Royal Australian Air Force, determine that UAP are likely to be one of three things: natural or other benign phenomena, number one; number two, sensor errors; or number three, foreign adversarial technology, or maybe our own technology that's been misidentified. So without having investigated the topic of UAP since 1996, and up until that point in time, without having formally engaged the United States on the UAP topic to request a briefing, and having not been privy to any of the classified information that was included in the classified reports that were provided to Congress from the ODNI's preliminary assessment on UAP and reports thereafter, the Royal Australian